The 42nd Street subway station wasn't a place for quiet. It was a beast made of rattling steel, screeching brakes, and 1,000 rushing conversations all happening at once. It smelled of wet concrete, stale pretzels, and that faint metallic tang of electricity. And every evening, as the downtown crowds thinned and the uptown express trains roared through, two men played their parts in the nightly routine. The first was the conductor. He was a man built like a piece of the infrastructure, himself solid, uncompromising, with a voice that didn't ask, it told. His uniform was always sharp, his hat sat perfectly straight, and he ran his platform with the tight control of a ship's captain in a storm. To him, the station was a system of clocks and schedules, of rules that kept the chaos at bay. He took a fierce, private pride in the fact that the 715 northbound always left on his mark. The passengers were a flowing, faceless river. The other workers were parts of the machine. And he was the one who made sure the machine worked. The other man was the janitor. He was older, with a kind of gentle slowness to his movements that wasn't laziness, but care. His world was the details the conductor missed. The gum wadded under a bench, the coffee spill by the newsstand, the layer of grime that slowly fogged the great tiled archways. He worked with a soft hum, a constant presence, pushing a wide mop or emptying bins with a quiet clatter. He didn't command the space. He tended to it, like a gardener tending to stubborn, concrete soil. The conductor didn't know the janitor's name. He'd never bothered to learn it. To him, the man was just the cleaner, a necessary, quiet part of the background, like the flickering fluorescent lights or the ever-dripping pipe near stairwell 4. Their interactions were simple and one-way. Move your cart, please, it's in the way. Or a sharp nod towards a pile of trash someone had left. The janitor would always nod back, his eyes a calm, unreadable gray, and do as he was asked without a word. The janitor, for his part, knew the conductor's rhythm. He knew the man's footsteps, the particular sigh he made when the 642 was running late again, the way he'd square his shoulders before making an announcement. He watched the river of people too, but he saw faces. The tired woman who read the same book every night. The young man practicing dance moves when he thought no one was looking. The old couple who always held hands waiting for the local. And he listened. The station was full of sound, but underneath the noise, there was music. It came from the buskers, the hopeful souls who tried to fill the cavernous space with guitar chords or saxophone riffs. Their sound would bounce off the hard surfaces, mixing with the echoes of the trains into a strange underground symphony. The janitor would often pause in his work, leaning on his mop handle, his head tilted just so, listening. Sometimes his fingers would tap a silent rhythm on the worn wood. Sometimes, if the music was particularly good, his hand would rise and fall slightly, tracing the shape of the melody in the damp, thick air dot. This was what the conductor noticed one Tuesday evening. The 705 had just cleared out, and the platform was momentarily still. Over by the northbound staircase, a young woman was playing a violin. She wasn't very good. The notes were thin and shaky, fighting against the rumble of a distant train. But the janitor had stopped. He was standing perfectly still, his mop forgotten in its bucket, his right hand moving gently through the air as if he were guiding her, as if he could pull a sweeter sound from her strings just by willing it. A hot spike of irritation shot through the conductor. Here was a delay. Here was a lack of focus. The man was supposed to be cleaning the soda splash from the afternoon rush, not daydreaming about music he probably knew nothing about. The conductor's own day had been long. A signal delay had caused a cascade of headaches. A tourist had yelled at him over a missed connection, and his feet ached. The sight of this old man's peaceful, wandering attention felt like a personal insult to his own grinding, efficient world. He strode over, his polished shoes clicking on the wet tiles. The janitor didn't hear him approach, lost as he was in the faltering melody. The conductor stopped right beside him, his shadow falling over the mop bucket. "You," the conductor said, his voice cutting through the violin's whine. The janitor started, his hand dropping to his side. He turned, those calm gray eyes meeting the conductor's stern gaze. "This platform needs to be cleared before the next express," the conductor stated, not asking. He jerked his thumb towards the back wall, where a dark stain of spilled soda lingered. "That's your job. That stain is your job. Not this." He waved a dismissive hand towards the busker, who had now stopped playing, watching the scene with wide, embarrassed eyes. The janitor opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. He simply nodded and reached for his mop handle, but the conductor wasn't finished. The frustration of his day found a perfect target. The man's silence, his peaceful demeanor, it all felt like a challenge. He needed to make the order stick, to reassert the proper order of things. He took a half-step closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its edge. He wanted the janitor, and anyone nearby, to understand the hierarchy of this place. "Pay attention to your buckets. Not the music," he said, the words precise and cold. He let them hang for a second, ensuring they landed. Then he delivered the line that, to him, explained everything. It defined their roles, their places in the station, their places in the world. "You're just a janitor." The words echoed in the sudden quiet. The busker had completely stopped. A few waiting passengers glanced over, then quickly looked away, pretending not to have heard. The phrase just hung there, ugly and final. The janitor flinched. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight tightening around his eyes, a small intake of breath. For a single second, the calm, unreadable surface cracked, and the conductor saw something flash in those gray depths. It wasn't anger. It was something older and deeper, a profound, weary sadness. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. The mask of quiet neutrality settled back into place. The janitor didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just gave another slow nod, that sad ghost of a smile touching the corners of his lips. It was a smile that seemed to hold a secret, a private joke the conductor wasn't in on. He turned his back, gripped his mop, and began pushing the dirty water toward the stain on the wall. The swish, swish, swish of the fibers on tile, the only sound he made. The conductor watched him for a moment. A strange, unsettled feeling in his gut. He'd won. He'd asserted control. The system was back in order. But the victory felt hollow, bitter. He'd expected some kind of reaction, shame, maybe, or muttered apology. Not this quiet, sad acceptance. He shook his head, dismissing the feeling. Sentiment had no place on the platform. Efficiency did. He turned on his heel, checked his watch, and raised his voice to address the few waiting passengers. "Express on track 2 in 90 seconds. He announced, his professional bark returning. The station's normal noise slowly swelled back up, swallowing the awkward silence. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the janitor finish with the stain. The old man emptied his dirty water down a drain, refilled the bucket with clean, and went back to work, moving steadily down the platform. He didn't look at the busker again. He didn't look at the conductor. He just kept mopping, a silent, solitary figure in the underground gloom, the conductor's words seeming to cling to his worn uniform like the station's grimed out. The conductor put it out of his mind. He had a schedule to keep, but the echo of his own words, "You're just a janitor," followed him for the rest of his shift, a tiny discordant note in the rhythm of his perfectly ordered world. He didn't know it then, but he had just scorned the one person in the entire, rumbling, chaotic station who understood its true music. And that understanding would soon become the only thing that could save them all. The strange, sour feeling from the night before didn't last. The conductor was a practical man. By the next morning, as he smoothed down his uniform and prepared for the day's first rush, the incident on the platform felt small and distant. He had spoken the plain truth, hadn't he? It was about focus, about doing a job properly. The station didn't run on daydreams. It ran on rules. The memory of the janitor's sad smile was just a flicker, quickly buried under the more pressing concerns of delayed trains and crowded cars. The janitor, however, seemed to have taken the words to heart. In the days that followed, the conductor noticed a change. The old man became even quieter, if that was possible. He kept his eyes down, fixed on his mop or his trash bags. He no longer paused to listen to the buskers. When the young woman with the violin returned, he made a point of working on the opposite end of the platform. The squeak of his cartwheels, a deliberate treat. It was as if he had shrunk into his role, becoming exactly what the conductor had called him, just a janitor. This, the conductor thought with a nod of satisfaction, was how it should be. Order. The conductor's own world was about to be thrown into chaos. It started on a rainy Thursday, just after the evening rush. The lights, the constant humming fluorescent lights that painted everything in a sickly white glow, flickered. Not just once, but 3 times in a row. A collective groan rose from the waiting passengers. The conductor felt a knot form in his stomach. Flickering lights meant power issues. Power issues meant delays. He got on his radio. Control, this is 42nd Street platform. We're seeing a light flicker. You seeing anything? The crackling voice that came back was tense. We've got a dip in the grid. Con Edison is on it. Should be minor. Stand by. The conductor announced there would be a brief hold, his voice betraying none of his own worry. But the brief hold stretched into 10 minutes, then 20. The station grew more crowded as trains backed up along the line. The air, always thick, became hot and stifling. People were getting restless. Then, at exactly 8:17 p.m., it happened. The lights didn't just flicker. They died, every single one of them. The great, tiled vault of 42nd Street Station was plunged into a blackness so complete it felt solid. For a second, there was absolute, stunned silence, broken only by the distant, panicked screech of a train's brakes far down the tunnel. Then the noise erupted. It wasn't the normal station noise. This was the sound of fear. A woman yelped. A child started crying, a sharp, scared wail. A man's voice shouted, "Hey, what's going on?" Dozens of phone flashlights stabbed into the darkness, creating a crazy dance of blinding beams and long, leaping shadows. They illuminated faces twisted with alarm. People clutching bags tighter, groups huddling together. The conductor's training kicked in. He fumbled for his own heavy flashlight and clicked it on, aiming the beam at the ceiling. "Everyone stay calm," he shouted, his voice the loudest thing in the dark. "It's a power outage. We have backup systems. Please move away from the platform edge." But the backup systems weren't kicking in. The emergency lights, the little red exit signs, nothing. The darkness was total. His radio was now a mess of frantic voices from other stations, from trains stuck in tunnels. The words citywide, major failure, and unknown duration cut in and out of the static. His own message to control went unanswered. He tried to make an announcement on the PA system, but it was dead. He had to use his lungs. "Your attention, please," he bellowed. "We are experiencing a major power failure. For your safety, I need everyone to move to the center of the platform, away from the tracks. Stay with the group. Help is on the way." But on the way felt meaningless in that pressing dark. The crowd, maybe 60 or 70 people now trapped together, was not listening as one. Panic is a contagious thing. It started in whispers. "We're trapped down here. What if a train comes? My phone's at 10%. The child's crying grew louder, feeding the anxiety. The conductor swung his flashlight beam across the sea of faces, seeing anger now mixing with the fear. "Listen to me," he yelled, desperation creeping into his voice. "You must stay calm." A large man in a business suit stepped into his beam. "How long?" he demanded, his voice tight. "They said on my app it could be hours." "Hours down here in the dark? This is unacceptable." Murmurs of agreement rose around him. The conductor felt the situation, like sand slipping through his fingers. He was used to commanding respect, to being the voice of authority. But here, in the primal dark, his uniform meant little. He was just another scared person with a flashlight. The knot in his stomach tightened into a cold fist of dread. This was how bad things happened. Stampedes. People falling onto tracks. He kept shouting orders, but they were beginning to sound hollow, even to him. He saw the janitor then. In the bouncing beams of light, the old man was a still figure near his utility closet. He wasn't panicking. He was just standing there, watching the scene unfold, his face unreadable in the jagged shadows. For a fleeting second, the conductor felt a fresh spike of that old irritation. Asterisk, do something useful. Help me corral these people. But what could the old man do? Hand out mops? The air grew hotter. The crying child was now sobbing hysterically, and the mother's attempts to soothe her were fraying into tears of her own. A group of teenagers, trying to laugh it off at first, were now getting shovey and loud near the stairs. The conductor pushed his way toward them, his voice growing hoarse. "Step back. Everyone, just take a deep breath." But nobody was breathing deep. The darkness was filling their lungs. It was in that moment, as the conductor felt a true chilling wave of helplessness wash over him, that he saw the janitor move. The old man didn't rush. He simply turned, a slow and deliberate movement in the chaos. He placed a hand on the door of his grimy, metal utility closet, the place where he kept his brooms, his bottles of yellow cleaner, his rolls of trash bags. He opened it. The conductor, for a ridiculous second, thought he might be fetching a candle or a spare flashlight, but the janitor didn't emerge with cleaning supplies. He bent into the darkness of the closet and brought out a long rectangular case. It was old, scuffed, and covered in a layer of dust that glowed in the passing phone lights. He laid it carefully on top of his cleaning cart, flipped the latches with a soft click-click that nobody but the conductor seemed to hear, and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in worn blue velvet, was a violin. Its wood was a deep, warm brown, glowing like honey, even in the bad light. It wasn't new. It was an instrument that had been loved and played, and then put away for a long, long time. The conductor stopped shouting. He just stared, his mind refusing to connect what he was seeing to the reality of their situation. What was he doing? This was no time for whatever this was. The janitor lifted the violin and a bow from the case with a tenderness the conductor had never seen in him. He tucked the instrument under his chin, his movements sure and practiced, a familiar dance his body had not forgotten. He gave the bow a gentle twist, tightening the hair. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the conductor. He looked straight ahead into the blackness of the tunnel, as if he could see something there no one else could. Then he closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, the first truly deep breath anyone had taken in that station for 10 minutes. And he drew the bow across the strings. The sound that came out was not a tentative squeak. It was not the sound of the young busker. It was a single, clear, perfect note. It was so pure, so resonant, it seemed to vibrate in the conductor's teeth. It cut through the babble and the sobs and the fear like a beam of solid light cutting through the dark. The note hung in the thick, hot air. Then it became another and another, weaving into a slow, achingly familiar melody. It was a piece of music the conductor knew. He'd heard it in movies, in old concert halls on the radio. Batch, the notes were complex, sorrowful but incredibly strong, filling the vast space of the station, bouncing off the tiles and wrapping around the frightened people. The crying child's sobs hitched, then softened into a quiet whimper. The shouting man fell silent. Every single phone beam, as if pulled by a magnet, swung away from the ceiling and the walls and focused on the slight old man in the janitor's uniform standing by his cart. His face was a mask of concentration, of a deep and private feeling being poured out through his fingers and into the wood of the violin. The conductor's flashlight wavered and then dropped to his side. His mouth was slightly open. All the air seemed to have left his lungs. He wasn't looking at a janitor anymore. He was looking at a master. The secret, the private joke behind that sad smile, was now singing out into the darkness for everyone to hear. And in that moment, the conductor understood two things with absolute, shocking clarity. He had been completely, utterly wrong about this man, and this man, with his secret violin, might be the only thing holding their crumbling world together. The single pure note didn't just cut through the noise. It stopped it. It was like a spell had been cast over the entire platform. The air, which a moment before had been thick with panic and hot breath, seemed to clear. All the little chaotic sounds, the shuffling feet, the worried whispers, the sharp, angry voices just melted away, swallowed by that one. Held note. For a few seconds, there was only the violin and the distant, lonely drip of water from a pipe somewhere in the tunnel. Every face, lit by the cold bluish glow of phone screens, was turned toward the source of the sound. They saw an old man in a gray janitor's uniform, his eyes closed, his body swaying just slightly with the music he was pulling from the instrument. It didn't make sense. It was a puzzle piece from a different world suddenly pressed into theirs. A cleaner was playing a violin in a blackout, but the music didn't care if it made sense. It just was. Then the note flowed into another, and another, weaving into that slow, deep song. It was music that felt old, full of a kind of dignified sadness that somehow made the dark less frightening. It wasn't cheerful. It didn't try to pretend everything was okay. It acknowledged the darkness, the fear, the being trapped. It just said, "I know. Me too." And in doing that, it took the sharp edge off the panic dot the conductor stood frozen, his flashlight now pointing at the wet tiles by his feet, making a small, lonely circle of light. He couldn't look away from the janitor. He watched the man's hands. The left hand moved up and down the neck of the violin, the fingers pressing the strings not with stiffness, but with a fluid, confident grace. They knew every inch of that wood. The right hand drew the bow, its movement steady and sure, creating a sound that was both powerful and tender. This wasn't someone who had learned a few tunes. This was a language he spoke with his whole body. The memory of his own voice came back to him, sharp and ugly. Asterisk, you're just a janitor. The words echoed in his head, now sounding so small and stupid against this beautiful, complicated sound. He had seen the man's hands 100 times, clutching a mop handle or lifting a heavy trash bag. He'd never imagined they could do this. The janitor finished the first piece. The last note faded slowly, hanging in the air until it was just a memory of a sound. In the silence that followed, no one spoke. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of performance. It was a gift, and the crowd held it quietly, carefully. The only noise was the shaky breath of the mother, now rocking her sleeping child. The janitor opened his eyes. He looked out at the sea of dim, glowing faces watching him. He gave the smallest of nods, not a bow to an audience, but more like an acknowledgement. Yes, we are here, together. Then he tucked the violin back under his chin. This time, he played something different. It wasn't a famous classical piece. It was a melody that seemed to come from the station itself. It was lower, with a rhythm that mimicked the distant rumble of a train you feel in your feet before you hear it. It had little runs of notes that sounded like the squeak of turning wheels, and long, low pulls of the bow that echoed the vast, empty space above them. He was improvising, playing the sound of the underground. A young man near the front, who had been recording the chaos on his phone, slowly lowered it. He wasn't recording anymore. He was just listening. A few people slowly sat down on the ground, their backs against the cold tile walls, closing their eyes. The group of teenagers settled down, their nervous energy softening into concentration. The businessman who had been so angry unclenched his fists and leaned his head back, staring into the darkness above where the music swam. The conductor finally made himself move. He didn't approach the janitor. He felt like he would be trespassing on something sacred. Instead, he did the only useful thing he could think of. He quietly clicked off his bright flashlight. Then, he walked slowly along the edge of the crowd, speaking in a low, calm voice to the people holding their phones up. "Save your batteries," he murmured. "Just listen." One by one, the blinding white beams winked out. A few people left their screens on, laying them on the ground like little campfires, casting soft upward glows on tired faces. The platform was plunged into a deeper, kinder dark, lit only by these pools of faint light and the green exit signs that had finally flickered on with a weak, battery-powered glow. Now the only thing alive in the darkness was the music. The conductor found a spot against a pillar and slid down to sit. He let his head rest back on the cool tiles. He listened. Really listened. He heard things in the music he hadn't noticed before. A faint tremble in a long note that spoke of loneliness. A sudden, faster passage that felt like hope trying to break through. He looked at the janitor's face, illuminated by the glow from a phone on his cart. The calm, distant expression was gone. Now there was a raw, open emotion there. A pain, yes, but also a kind of release. This was a man who had been holding this music inside for a very long time. The conductor's mind raced with questions. Who was he? Where did he learn to play like that? Why was he here, cleaning floors, when he could make sounds like this? He thought of all the times he'd seen the man pause, listening to the buskers. He wasn't just daydreaming. He was probably, in his head, correcting their mistakes, wishing he could show them how. He thought of the sad smile. That was the smile of a man carrying a secret world inside him, a world he thought no one wanted to hear. The music shifted again, softening into a gentle, lullaby-like tune. The janitor was looking directly at the mother and the now sleeping child. He played for them, the notes as soft as a whisper. The mother mouthed the words, "Thank you," into the dark, tears tracing clean lines down her dusty cheeks. A profound shame settled over the conductor, heavy and cold. It wasn't just about being rude. It was about being blind. He had spent years in this station, believing he saw everything, that he understood its order. He had sorted people into categories: passengers, workers, problems. He had put this man in the smallest, plainest box he had, janitor. And in doing so, he had missed the entire, stunning truth of him. He had valued the schedule over the soul, the rule over the wonder. The janitor finished the lullaby. He paused, lowering the violin for a moment, taking a slow breath. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. Someone from the crowd, a woman's voice, soft and thick with emotion, spoke into the quiet. "Please," she said. "Don't stop." He didn't. He raised the violin again. This time, he began a tune that was a little brighter, a melody that felt like remembering a good day. It wasn't joyous, but it was warm. It felt like the first cup of coffee in the morning, or sunlight on your face after a long winter. People began to look at each other, not with fear, but with a shared understanding. Strangers' eyes met in the dim light, and they gave small, weary smiles. They were in this together, in this strange, dark concert hall. The conductor watched this happen. He saw the community form, not from his commands, but from the shared, unexpected beauty. He, the man in charge, had been powerless to stop the fear. But this quiet man with his violin had transformed it. He didn't have a rule book or a loudspeaker. He just had the truth inside him, and he had chosen to share it. The conductor knew then that nothing in his station would ever be the same. The old order, the one where he was the authority, and the janitor was just part of the background, was broken. It had been shattered by 4 strings and a bow, and the courageous, quiet heart of the man who played them. He wasn't sure what came next, but as he sat in the dark, listening to the music wash over them all, he knew one thing for certain. He would never, ever look at the old man the same way again. The music didn't just fill the station. It changed the very feel of the air. Time, which had been stuck and heavy with fear, began to flow again, measured now by the rise and fall of the melody. The janitor played for what felt like both a minute and an hour. He moved from the hopeful tune into something slower, more thoughtful. It was a conversation between the low, singing notes and the soft, sighing ones. People weren't just waiting for the power anymore. They were listening, truly listening, some with their eyes closed, others watching the shadowy figure by the cleaning cart, with a kind of awe. The conductor watched the crowd. The change was a real physical thing he could see. Shoulders that had been hunched up near ears began to relax. Faces that were tight with worry softened. The mother had her cheek resting on her sleeping child's head, a look of pure relief on her face. The angry businessman was just a man now, sitting with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as the music washed over him. The conductor's own feelings were a tangled knot. The shame was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but on top of it was a growing, staggering respect. And beneath that, a deep, curious wonder. Who was this man? The question buzzed in his head, louder than the static on his dead radio. Finally, the janitor drew the bow across the strings in one long, fading note, and let his hands fall to his sides. He looked exhausted, but in a good way, like someone who had just put down a heavy weight they'd been carrying for miles. A quiet sigh went through the crowd. It was over, but the spell wasn't broken. No one moved. No one wanted to break the silence that followed, which was now a comfortable, shared quiet. Not a fearful one. It was then that the lights on the platform flickered once, twice, and then hummed back to life. The sudden fluorescent glare was a shock. People blinked, raising hands to their eyes. The ordinary, harsh world came rushing back. The grimy tiles, the litter, the faded posters on the walls, it all looked the same, but it felt completely different. The magic of the dark concert was over. For a moment, everyone just stood there, disoriented. Then, as if someone had pressed a button, the normal sounds started up. A train horn blew in the distance. The PA system crackled to life with a garbled, automated announcement about delays. People looked at their phones, checking the time, getting messages. But before the moment could completely disappear, someone started to clap. It was a single, hesitant pair of hands. Then another person joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire platform was filled with the sound of applause. It wasn't the wild cheering of a sports game. It was slower, deeper, full of gratitude. People were smiling, some still wiping at their eyes. The janitor seemed startled by the noise. He looked at the crowd clapping for him, and a flush of embarrassment colored his cheeks. He quickly and carefully placed the violin back in its case, as if hiding the evidence. He gave one small, awkward nod, then turned to close the lid. The conductor saw him trying to shrink away, to become invisible again. He watched as people began to approach the old man. The mother touched his arm gently and said something the conductor couldn't hear. The young man with the phone was talking excitedly, probably showing him the recording. The janitor just kept nodding, that same polite, distant smile on his face, the one that now seemed to the conductor like a wall the man built around himself. Something tightened in the conductor's chest. He couldn't let him just slip back into the shadows. Not now. Not after what he had just done for all of them. He had to speak to him. He had to. He didn't know what. Apologize? Thank him? Ask him 100 questions? He pushed himself up from the floor, his stiff joints protesting. He walked toward the cleaning cart. The small crowd around the janitor saw him coming, and sensing something, quietly moved aside. The conductor and the janitor stood facing each other in the bright, unforgiving light. The conductor, in his rumpled uniform, and the janitor, holding his worn case. The conductor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. All the words he had thought of seemed wrong. I'm sorry felt too small. Who are you? Felt too rude. He just stared, his own face probably looking as lost and confused as he felt. The janitor met his gaze. His gray eyes were calm again, but they held a new depth, as if the music had opened a window to the inside. He waited that finally, the conductor found his voice. It came out rough, quieter than he meant it to be. That was? He started and gestured weakly toward the air where the music had been. I've never heard anything like that. Not here. Not ever, really. The janitor gave a small shrug, looking down at the case in his hands. It's an old friend, he said softly. The violin, I mean. Helps? Helps? The conductor echoed. He couldn't stop looking at the man's hands. The long, slender fingers that had just worked miracles were now curled gently around the handle of the case. Where did you learn to play like that? The janitor was silent for a long moment. He looked past the conductor, down the dark tunnel, as if the answer was somewhere in there. When he spoke, his voice was so low, the conductor had to lean in to hear it over the hum of the station. A long time ago. Another life. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I played. For people. In big rooms with lights on you. It was all there was. A concert violinist, the conductor said, the pieces clicking into place with a thud. The skill, the ease, the emotion, it all made a terrible, perfect sense. The janitor nodded slowly, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. Something like that. But the lights, the people watching, it started to feel like being in a cage. The bigger the room, the smaller I felt. The music got stuck. It wouldn't come out right with all those eyes on me. He patted the violin case. Here, it's different. The acoustics are good. And the audience. He glanced at the last few passengers heading for the newly arrived train. The audience isn't really there for you. They're just passing through. Sometimes, if you play very late, it's just you and the echoes. They're a good audience, the echoes. They never judge. They just give the music back to you. The conductor listened, his heart aching. He thought of his own pride in his loud voice and his strict schedule. He thought of the pressure he felt to control everything. He couldn't imagine the pressure of 1,000 people waiting for you to create beauty. And he couldn't imagine the courage it took to walk away from that, and to find a way to keep the music alive in a place like this. In secret. I called you just a janitor, the conductor said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. He needed to say it. That was. It was the most ignorant thing I've ever said. The janitor looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. He didn't smile. He just nodded again, a slow acceptance. You saw the job, he said simply. Not the man. Most people do. It's easier that way. The honesty of it hit the conductor like a physical blow. It was true. He had done exactly that. He had seen a function, not a person. The music tonight, the conductor said, struggling to find the right way to say what he felt. You saved this situation. I was losing control. You gave them something else to feel. You saved us. This time, the janitor did offer a small, genuine smile. It was a tired smile, but it reached his eyes. The music was already here, he said, his hand making a gentle arc that took in the arches of the station. I just let it out. An announcement echoed, calling the last train of the night. The platform was almost empty. The crisis was over. The conductor knew he couldn't hold the man there all night. But he couldn't just let him go back to being a ghost either. He pointed a thumb toward the utility closet. You're your friend. It's safe in there? It has been for years, the janitor said. Good, the conductor said. He took a deep breath, making a decision. Tomorrow. The stain by the south wall. It's been there a week. You should take care of it. It was an order, but it was spoken in a completely new tone. There was a respect in it, an understanding. It was saying, asterisk, I know what you do here matters too. This your domain. Asterisk, the janitor understood. He gave a final firm nod. First thing, he said. He turned, placed the violin case back into the darkness of his closet, and closed the door with a soft, metallic click. When he turned back, he was just the janitor again, his hands empty. But everything was different. The conductor watched him pick up his mop and begin pushing his cart toward the back offices, his work night not yet done. He stood alone on the bright, empty platform, the echoes of the music and the echoes of his own foolish words still ringing in his ears. The station was back to normal, but he knew he was forever changed. He had seen the secret heart of the place, and it was more beautiful and more sad than he had ever dreamed. The morning after the blackout, the station felt like it was holding its breath. The usual rush was the same clatter of heels, the same rumble of trains, the same muffled announcements. But for the conductor, everything had a new layer of sound underneath. Like the faint memory of a song you can't quite shake. He stood on the platform, adjusting his hat, his eyes scanning. He saw the janitor right away. The old man was where he'd said he'd be, working on that stubborn stain by the south wall. He was scrubbing at it with a brush, his movements slow and methodical. To anyone else, he was just the cleaner, doing his job. But the conductor saw the careful, patient hands. He saw the way the man's head was tilted, listening to the sounds of the station as he worked. Their eyes met from across the platform. The janitor gave a small, almost invisible nod. The conductor returned it, a quick, respectful dip of his chin. No words were needed. It was a new understanding, written in silent code. The days that followed settled into a new kind of normal. It wasn't a big, dramatic change. The conductor didn't start making grand speeches. The janitor didn't suddenly perform concerts in the middle of the day. The station had its rules, and they both still lived by them. But the rules had softened at the edges. The conductor's orders became requests. When you get a chance, could you check the spill near the stairs? He'd say, his voice lacking its old bite. He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. He'd see the janitor talking softly to the elderly regular who sold newspapers, helping her lift a heavy bundle. He'd see him chasing a runaway candy wrapper with a quiet determination, not because he had to, but because he cared about the place. He wasn't just anything. He was the station's caretaker, in every sense of the word. One rainy afternoon, about a week later, the young woman with the violin was back. She was trying to play a complicated piece, but her fingers were fumbling. She sounded frustrated, close to giving up. The conductor watched from his post. He saw the janitor pause in his mopping, listening. The old man's face showed a familiar concentration, not judgment, but a deep focus. He seemed to be feeling every missed note. The conductor did something he would never have done before. He walked over to the young woman. "Keep at it," he said, not unkindly. Then he gestured with his thumb toward the other end of the platform. "Try playing over there, under the big arch. The sound is better, less echoey." She looked surprised, but gathered her things. As she moved, the conductor caught the janitor's eye. The old man gave a slight, knowing smile. He knew the conductor had just told her to stand in the exact spot with the best acoustics in the station, the spot he himself used late at night. It was a small secret, passed between them. The biggest change, however, happened after dark. Once the last express train had roared through, and the platform was mostly empty, the conductor would finish his paperwork. Instead of leaving immediately, he'd sometimes linger. He'd pretend to check a schedule or inspect a sign, but he was really waiting. He'd see the janitor finish his final rounds, lock his cart, and then, with a glance around, open the utility closet. The conductor would find a shadowy spot on a bench, out of the way. He'd sit perfectly still. And then the music would begin. It wasn't the same as the night of the blackout. That had been a powerful public gift. This was private, a conversation between a man and the empty space. Sometimes it was sad, a lonely melody that wandered like someone lost in thought. Sometimes it was just scales and exercises, the raw materials of music, practiced with infinite patience. Sometimes it was a fragment of something grand and famous, played softly, as if remembering an old friend. The conductor sat in the dark and listened. It became the best part of his day. The stress of delayed trains, the angry passengers, the constant noise, it all melted away in those minutes. He wasn't a conductor listening to a janitor. He was just a man, being allowed to hear another man's heart. He learned the music wasn't about showing off. It was about breathing. It was how the old man made sense of his own life, of his past in the bright lights and his present in the quiet dark. One evening, the conductor brought a second cup of coffee from the break room. He walked over to where the janitor was taking a rare moment of rest, sitting on an upturned bucket. He held the cup out. The janitor looked at it, then up at the conductor. He took it with a quiet "thank you." They sat in silence for a minute, listening to the distant drip-drip from the tunnel. "The piece you played last night," the conductor said finally, his voice hesitant. "The fast one with all the little running notes? What was it?" The janitor looked surprised, then pleased. "You remember it?" he asked. "I remember all of them," the conductor said honestly. That one sounded happy. A real warm smile spread across the janitor's face, erasing years of quiet lines. "It was," he said. "It's about spring, about things growing again." They didn't talk about the past. They didn't talk about concert halls or stage fright. They talked about the music itself, the way two people might talk about the weather with a shared appreciation. It was a fragile bridge being built between two very different worlds. News, of course, has a way of traveling in a place like a subway station. The story of the blackout concert was too good not to share. Passengers who had been there told their friends. The young man's shaky phone video, which showed only a dark, blurry figure and that glorious, clear sound, got passed around online. People started to whisper. They'd nod toward the quiet janitor pushing his cart. "That's him," they'd say. "That's the guy." He became a quiet legend. The station's ghost. The subway virtuoso. But unlike a viral sensation, which burns bright and fast, this was a slow, deep kind of fame. It was based on respect, not clicks. Passengers began to treat him differently. Not with fanfare, but with a silent courtesy. People would make sure to throw their trash in the bin when he was nearby. The coffee cart vendor started saving a day-old muffin for him, wrapped in a napkin. The regulars would give him a smile and a simple, "Good evening." One night, a middle-aged man in a nice coat approached him timidly. The conductor watched from a distance, ready to step in if needed. The man spoke to the janitor for a minute. The old man listened, then shook his head gently, his expression kind but firm. The man nodded, looking a little disappointed but not upset. He shook the janitor's hand and left. Later, over their coffee, the conductor asked about it. He was from a community orchestra, the janitor explained, sipping his drink. Asked if I'd come play with them. Just a small thing. Why didn't you say yes? The conductor asked, curious. The janitor looked around the station, at the great arching ceiling he knew every crack of. "This is my orchestra," he said simply. "The echoes are my section. The rumble of the 710 is my percussion." It's enough. The conductor understood. He wasn't a fallen star waiting to be rediscovered. He was exactly where he wanted to be. He had found his own strange, perfect stage. Years went by. The conductor's hair got grayer. The janitor moved a little slower. But their routine held. The station went on, with its daily chaos and its nightly quiet concerts for an audience of one. Then, one day, the janitor wasn't there. His cart was in its spot, unlocked. His uniform jacket was hanging in the closet. But he was gone. He had retired quietly, just as he had done everything else. The station felt different. It was louder, somehow, colder. The conductor felt the loss like a missing note in a familiar song. He did his job, but the color had drained from his world. A week later, a package arrived at the station manager's office, addressed to the conductor. It was a flat, rectangular box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a simple, unlabeled recording disc. There was no note. That night, after his shift, the conductor went down to the empty platform. He sat on their bench. He used his phone to play the recording down at first. There was just the familiar ambient noise of the station at night, the hum, the distant trains, the drip. Then the clear, resonant sound of a single violin note filled the air, bouncing off the tiles. It was a recording made right here, in this spot. The janitor had left behind one final, private concert. The conductor leaned his head back against the cool tile and closed his eyes. The music swelled, a beautiful, bittersweet melody he'd never heard before. It was a song of goodbyes and of gratitude. As it played, perfectly at home in the space it was made for, the conductor finally understood the man completely. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just a violinist. He was the soul of the place. And as long as his music could be heard here, in the memories of those who'd heard it, and in the lonely echoes of the night, he always would be.